Dr. Yasir Qadi, then we can talk about that one. Yeah. So what's his opinion?
So he said that among non-Muslim scholars of Hadith, that it's not really taken seriously, these Hadith, that they don't go all the way back to the Prophet.
That's not true.
That's what I've heard. So I want to know your opinion.
That's not true. The scholars are taken very seriously. In fact, some of the scholars, like Dr. Jonathan Brown, because of Hadith studies, he became a Muslim. So I don't know what Dr. Yasir Qadi is talking about here. Why are you not a Muslim?
Sorry?
Why are you not a Muslim?
So, one thing, people often say, Muhammad was...
What's your name, sorry?
Sorry, Austin.
Austin, I'm Mansoor. Nice to meet you.
I've seen your videos.
All right. If you come here, we'll see your videos too. That's how it works.
Sure. So, people will say Muhammad was the perfect example, or they'll give other kinds of evidence. A lot of this is based on Hadith. So I'm wondering, why should I trust Hadith? Especially since, according to Yasir Qadi, I'm not an expert, but it seems like a lot of these aren't taken seriously among non-Muslims. So what's your take on that?
Who is Yasir Qadi? Which Yasir Qadi are you referring to?
I'm not. I just remember seeing a video.
Okay, never mind. If you're thinking about someone...
I'm not sure.
Yeah. If you think about Dr. Yasir Qadi, then we can talk about that one. Yeah. So what's his opinion?
So he said that among non-Muslim scholars of Hadith, that it's not really taken seriously, these Hadith, that they don't go all the way back to the Prophet.
That's not true.
That's what I've heard. So I want to know your opinion.
That's not true. The scholars are taken very seriously. In fact, some of the scholars, like Dr. Jonathan Brown, because of Hadith studies, he became a Muslim. So I don't know what Dr. Yasir Qadi is talking about here. Many Orientalist scholars are taking very seriously. In fact, they're very praising the whole system. You don't have anything even similar in Western tradition. The amount of and the strictness and the robustness of our Hadith scientists is nothing equivalent to anything from antiquity. Anything. Because if you look at anything from, say from the Bible, or from the Romans and the Greeks and the Persians, whatever comes from antiquity, if we were to ascertain whether there are indeed these things said or reported, what is our mechanism now in non-Islamic sciences, and we can compare with Islamic sciences. So what scholars do in textual criticism, as I'm sure you're familiar, Austin, they look at how early these things are, these records are.
The Isnad? The Isnad? The Isnad, is that what they're looking at, when you're talking about? The chains of transmission?
No, I'm talking about non-Islamic criteria of verifying and authenticating historical reports. So they look at how things are in the very earlier times when they're written down. So how early are they? Is it contemporary to the event, or is it much later? For example, if you look at the writings of Josephus, for example, about his antiquity, the earliest extant manuscript is like 1,000 years later, from the 10th century. So it is, even though it is believed to have been written, because you can see other people talking about it in their own writings, but the manuscripts of Josephus himself is like 1,000 years from his time. So even though it was compiled early, but the early attestation of his writings is much later. So how do we deal with this kind of material is a big question. So early attestation, contemporary or not, and then the other thing they look at is multiple attestation. Are there a lot of people writing about this event? Like imagine a dinosaur came up from the ground here, and only Austin talked about it. When there were cameras and people with their phones.
I could be full of it.
Exactly, because an event of this magnitude is expected naturally. We're using the natural methodology, not miraculous things that you were the only ones to witness these things and no one witnessed it. But we are saying no, everyone saw a dinosaur walking past, having a lunch or a brunch of some people here and there, and he walked past over there. It is expected that a lot of people will be talking about it to their friends and colleagues and families and children for generations to come, because such an event doesn't happen every day. Yeah? So multiple attestation is one of the criteria they use. But there are some other criteria which I think are not really robust criteria, like they talk about the principle of embarrassment. Because you can actually, if you're smart enough and say, let me write something, and people might think, that may be true, because you're anticipating people will say, like, this event that you're talking about something against yourself, which people don't do. They don't self-criticize. They don't self-criticize about the community. So these events must be true, because that's not what we expect from people, to criticize themselves or their own community. But this can be easily forged, okay? But in general, very early attestation, contemporary, multiple witnesses, that's what they normally want to see if an event is of ancient times. Compare this to the Bible or any other literature, or whether secular or sacred. What do we have? We have a very confusing amount of literature. The narrations within the Christendom in terms of who Christ was he someone who was sitting on the branch of a tree and witnesses Simon the Cyrene being crucified and he was laughing? Was he someone who didn't physically die? So Christians were writing left, right and center about Jesus Christ. Gospel of St. Thomas, Gospel of the Ebionites, Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of Philip, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Judas, and the list goes on. More than 40 Gospels have been authored by people who call themselves presumably Christians, because that's what they're talking about, their savior figure of some kind. So what do we understand about the historical identity of this person? Who do we take it from? We can't just brush them aside like, oh, these people have weird beliefs. They didn't believe in the physical suffering that God can go through, so they're called Gnostics. No, that's a preassumption. Why are we accepting the others and not the Arians? Why taking the Athanasius against the Arians or Trinitarians, and a whole plethora of information coming from a lot of people within the first few hundred years of Christianity. The fact that we don't have contemporary writings, because the writings haven't either survived or it wasn't written. Like what we find in the recordings of Paul, St. Paul, in his writings he's not aware of any gospel written by anyone called Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John. So presumably these were compiled later, because he would have known, because he's the one going about preaching about a gospel of Christ, and he is having some issues with his contemporaries. They're opposing this, two opposing gospel, and he's trying to say, no, you can have the Gentiles coming in, you don't have to be circumcised in flesh, and so on. So he seems to be appealing to the secular Greek-speaking to bring into this community that he's trying to arrive, not like what James and others trying to do. So we don't have this multiple attestation of people. We have late sources, and they're contradictory. Why is John called the non-synoptic gospel, for example? Because it doesn't adapt to the narratives of the three other gospels, which are called the synoptic gospels, seen with the one what? Same eye, okay, synoptic, because they have a similar kind of themes, but John seems to be quite separate. So the scholars who study these kind of things, they will say, he's projecting his Jesus onto the real Jesus. So he wants Jesus to be like this, that the way he's projecting it. So it's not the Jesus of history. So all the sayings of Jesus said, I am the bread, I am the life, and so on, it's all predominantly in John's gospel, not in the other gospels. So we have this kind of problems in attestating, but compare now to the Islamic sciences, okay? We have reports system in which when it was compiled in circulation to the community, mass community, it was already available in private hands. They had their own copies, they had their own circle and their own students, they learned and taught in this way. But it was then with major compilers, compiled formally, and they started giving you where they got the information from. So for example, Imam Bukhari, you've probably heard of Sahih Bukhari, yes. He would say, these are my teachers from which I am learning from, getting information from, and then I independently went through and collected this material from people. And each people that I'm getting this from, for example, from Austin. Imagine I want to know something about, 100 years ago, what happened? So I've come to you, Austin, I heard you have some information to tell. And then I said, okay, fine, let me check about Austin. How good person you are. Do you have honesty, integrity? Do you have a good character, good memory? And because you weren't there 100 years ago, did you get this information from someone that I can say, yeah, you met that person? So did you meet the person that you are narrating from? So you have someone called, like, say, Abdullah over there, okay? So were you contemporary of Abdullah, okay? Did you actually hear from Abdullah or not? I've analyzed your character. I see no reason of disbelief in you because other people are testifying about you, that you are an honest person. You've heard or you've written down your material from Abdullah, who actually taught you from his material, okay? So it could be from memory or it could be from writing. Still, it will count as a transmission. So if I know that this is what you have done, I will just check that, okay, you heard Abdullah. There's no reason to me doubt, and I can ascertain that. Go to Abdullah, okay? So this is the next person in the chain. Abdullah didn't witness that event either. He heard from, say, brother, Abdul Rahman. So did Abdul Rahman and Abdullah meet? Have to understand that. Abdullah, what about his character again? What do people say about him? If there is any hint or some understanding that he is not a person of good character and integrity, then it's already in question whether he actually heard from him. Then your information that you're passing from him, even though you are of good character, the information will lose credibility value because his weakness. If he was known, for example, actually, everything's fine. He had a good memory, but later in life, he lost his memory. So I would have to ascertain at what point did you hear from him? In his later point of life when he lost his memory, or weakened memory, or earlier point. So if I establish that you heard from him, wrote down, in early part of his life when he had memory no issues, then I can say information, the credibility is still of a higher value. But if it's weaker when you got it, then even though you are of a good person, good memory, I would not consider the material that I'm getting from you has this good value. So this is how we are ascertaining from Abdullah to Abdul Rahman, because Abdul Rahman is the one directly who witnessed the event. So automatically, if we were to compare the isnad system in Islam of historical verification of historical reports, the Bible will be considered weaker than our weakest hadith.
Weaker than Da'if?
Yes. Because the hadith has this kind of errors, right? I'm not saying it's totally fabricated, but if you were to compare even acceptable hadith, because weak hadith can still be acceptable in certain cases, like conveying to people to encouragement, be nice, be good, do this, these kind of things, because it's not to do with legislation. So scholars have categorized saying, in cases like this, even weak hadith, doesn't mean it's fabricated, it's just there's some weaknesses on the narrator, so we say this is still acceptable. But the Bible, in that category, is just even weaker than our weak hadiths. So when I say, for example, why you're not a Muslim, and you say you want to know about the hadith system, if you compare it in terms of the robustness, you have more reason to accept the hadith than the Gospels or any other writing for that matter. Just on historical verification of materials of antiquity alone. You know, the Arabs were very community of pride. Poetry is something they took very much pride in. If someone were to compose a good poetry, celebration. Birth of a son, celebration. Birth of a female daughter, blackness all over the face. Liability, financial liability. And some of them would go and take that live child and bury under the sun, alive. This is a bad custom, but it doesn't mean everything was bad. This was because they considered a financial liability of rearing female in a family. So they would really celebrate and even hang on the wall of the Kaaba one of their best compositions. They are called mu'allaqat. Have you heard of mu'allaqat? Something that is hanging, suspended. So they hang it on the wall of the Kaaba, and people will see it like, it's like, imagine your art is like in Louvre or in those museums in London, which are the most famous museums of art, for example, or famous art galleries. Everyone will really say, wow, look at this. So the Quran would come and totally make them numb and incapacitated. They can't match it. They're not able to interpret it. Do you know about rap music today? Thank you. Rap music? So yes, thank you so much. You are composing something instantly with rhymes and meters maybe, and I try to respond to you in rhymes and meters, okay? Not in prose like this, because that won't be musical composition. That is the kind of competition. So that's what used to do by them. When the Quran came and asked them to, okay, go on, do the similar kind of composition to match it. That was it. That was the end of their era of linguistic composition of Arabic literature, in the sense of how the Quran came and totally dominated and totally numbed the Arabs of their time, because it was not possible for them to imitate. And this continues to this day. It didn't stop them from composing poetry, but they would never dare imitate the Quran. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known growing up among the community, not learning any of the traits of poetry or prose or literature composition. He comes up with the Quran, and then he is saying all of these things. Now, there's few possibilities. Either he is lying, deceiving people by claiming to be a prophet of God. That is a conscious decision on his part for a particular reason and motive. Because why would he, not being from God, do that? Because he has to have a motive. You don't just do something when people are attacking you and even to plot to kill you. You risk your life, maybe because you have a goal in mind. Maybe you want to become the leader. Maybe you want to become the king. Maybe you want to become the wealthy. Maybe you want to have women because of your influence. So there are lots of reasons where political gain could have been a modus operandi of his thinking, why he would be a fake individual, an imposter pretending to be a prophet. Or maybe he was actually sincere, not lying, but he was deluded and crazy and insane. He didn't know that he was. Some people, they don't know what they claim. Or maybe he didn't even exist. It was all legends. People made stories about him. Pious forgery of the community. They just made him the person he existed, and he said all these things. Or he could be a true prophet. If you analyze now in terms of his person and what he's done, these are the main things of possibilities that could have led him to bring about this particular religion or this message that he brought. If we were to analyze all of them, leave the last one, that he was a genuine prophet of God, none of those stands to scrutiny. If he was lying, we need to establish his motive. He lived a life. Was it of luxury when he got all that he needed? Or he lived a life where he didn't have anything to eat for days? When he was sleeping, he would sleep probably in a brick type thing and a mattress made of palm leaves. One time, he complained. Why is it too soft? Because his wife folded it twice. A companion, his friend, is Umar radiallahu anhu, Uthman, one of them, radiallahu anhu. He saw the marks of these palm fibers on his back. And he was very sad, of course, because a prophet that is now like the emperor of all of this land, where he could have in the best mattresses of Persia or Rome, something like this, within his control, and yet he's sleeping in a mattress made of the palm fibers. So this is the lifestyle that he had. What happened when he was inviting people to accept God as their only creator, only one worthy of worship? They were trying to boycott him, expel him. Assalamu alaikum, Uncle Jamal, how are you? They even became frustrated to the point that they're saying, okay, what do you want? You know what? If you want to become the king, we'll make you the king. If you want to be the wealthiest person, we'll give you all the wealth. If you're after women, just name them. He rejected all of that. That was his time to be the leader, to be the one in control, to be the one to be famous, to be the one to have all these luxuries, wealth, money, women. What do people now strive by? These fake imposters of anyone, right? So he rejected all of that. In fact, he even said at one point, if you give me the sun in one hand and the moon in one hand, I would not stop calling you to this call that there is nothing worthy of worship except God alone. At one point, he had a golden opportunity. His son Ibrahim died, very young. And at that time, coincidentally, there was an eclipse. People were saying, look, even the sun or the moon, whatever the eclipse was, even that is showing sorrow to the son of the Prophet. Prophet ﷺ heard all of that and says, no. The sun and the moon does not eclipse for anyone, whether their birth or their death and so on. But these are just signs of God. So when you see that, praise God, the creator of the sun and the moon, worship. He taught us how to pray to God about those creations, to say these are his signs within the creation. That was a golden opportunity to say, of course, I am a prophet of God. Even the sun or the moon is eclipsed because my son died. That's what you expect fake individuals to do. So the material gain as a motive doesn't work at all. So he cannot be called a fake imposter because we cannot find any motive whatsoever. And what he brings, even if a fake individual were to say to something like this, how was he able to bring a Quran with all this linguistic composition? How was he able to bring information content of the past, prophesizing of the future? That's saying, the Romans have been defeated in the nearest or the lowest land, but they soon will be victorious again. In a period of bid'i sinin, between this number of years, 3 to 9 years. If it was a fake, imagine one of us were faking this. If we made that within the 3 to 9 years, they will regain victory again, knowing not the odds. Because two superpowers fighting with each other for a long time. It's not just suddenly once. They were actually fighting for a long time. And that's why the Quran talked about between 3 to 9 years, because these fightings will even continue here and there. And eventually, within the time frame towards the end, they will gain full victory. So if we were fake, we would not be able to say, for example, the people in Wales, what are they called? Welsh?
Yes, Welsh.
Wales and England. In United Kingdom, they will fight with each other and then say 2 years and 1 month later, after, say, Wales losing, they will be victorious again. What are the odds of that? You can't predict these kind of things. It's impossible to predict. Okay? It could have happened before, it could have happened later, and it could not even happen. So the Romans that were defeated in Surah 30, Surah Al-Rum, as the Quran said, it was possible that they never regained victory. It was possible they regained victory the next year, not within the time frame, or any of the time frame. Then the Quran would have been proven false. And that prophet, the fake individual, would have been exposed as a fake imposter who was pretending to be a prophet, prophesizing of the future. It happened exactly the way it is. How do you account for that if someone was just lying? So lying option is rationally can be eliminated. No motives, the composition, the contents, it's not possible for even someone who is consciously doing that.